Hello, and welcome to the first lesson in the third Fetter about rites and rituals. And I know when we normally talk about Fetter work, people don't really talk about rites and rituals. It's not really prioritized, and it's sort of as something that just falls by itself. Um, I think it's very very important to talk about, and that's why I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this. Because if you really think about it, um, how much identification in your life is happening in your everyday routines. And I know that this is the feta about the unskillful routines and the harmful routines, and we are going to talk about those as well. But just think about your morning when you wake up. Do you have a cup of coffee? You might say yes, every single morning. Lots of identification in that. Or you might say, no, I don't like coffee. Really? Lots of identification in that. And that's just about the coffee. How you bought the coffee, if you looked into if it was, organic or non-organic, if it was fair trade, all of that is part of your identification. It's part of the way that you are in the world. So this is a huge topic, and we're going to talk about things that are really, really uncomfortable to talk about. And I know that it might not seem possible after we've been through the toxic starting point and we've been through the fear, anger, guilt, and shame and all of that. It might seem completely impossible that there can be more that's like super uncomfortable to talk about. But if you look at it, the first feta is about identification with thought. That's when you realize that you can't have a single thought that is truth. All your identification, all your believing in an I can only happen via thought. If you do not attach any thought to anything and you're just in your direct experience, there's no thought attached to it. But very, very quickly, when you sit in your direct experience, you have found that that thought comes right away. And a lot of distraction is happening by thought all the time. In the second feta, we talked about the identification with feelings and the identification with emotions. And the first and the second are tied together, since when you're sitting in your direct experience and you just are sitting with what is, and just sitting with that pure being, any thought that comes up that your mind grabs hold on is a thought that is charged. Because if you've probably already done it because I talked about it in the last lesson, backing up a bit and looking at the thoughts before they choose their direction. Because you have like millions of thoughts happening, just like you have millions of things you can smell right now, and millions of things you can hear right now, millions of things you can see right now. But the mind is selecting one of those avenues, and it selects the avenue that gives the most entertainment, the most drama, that is feeding the ego the most. So when you sit and you back up, you can see that, oh my goodness, there's like this avenue of thoughts happening. I could have picked any one of those. I picked that one. And that one is the one that is giving me a sensation of fear, anger, guilt, or shame, or it's reminding me of a past experience. It's reminding me about something that I need to do in the future. It's taking me away from my direct experience, from what is happening right now. And what we talked about in the second feta is that the topic that the thought is taking you away from has a purpose. It has a meaning, and there is in that, because of your bubble of reality, in that there's there are a lot of clues hidden to you. And if you can pull yourself up and just observe what is happening, so you don't identify with the thought as we talked about in the first, and you don't identify with the feeling or the emotion coming up, you just observe what is happening, then you actually get a very, very clear insight to what your identification is about, who you identify as, and what has an and meaning in your life. And a lot of that is super, super heavy. And it's really, really painful. The mind makes you believe that it's really painful to look at. So what we do is that we create a lot of distractions and a lot of diversions. You have probably experienced that either with yourself, with thoughts coming up that you really want to look at this, you really, really want to work with this. And then you get an idea, a thought about, oh, tomorrow, actually, when I do the grocery, I need to remember completely different thing that has nothing to do with what is the most important thing for you to look at or to be with or create space for. And that diversion, that distraction that is happening, that's the third fetter. So the third fetter is about all the diversions and all the distractions that we create in our lives, so we do not look through the identification with thought, and we still maintain believing the identification with feeling and emotion. And that's why, in my opinion, the third fetter is very, very important to look at. And there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot. So I would also recommend you to go back to the first fetter. I mentioned this lots of times, but I'm going to repeat it again. Go back to the first fetter, have a notebook with you, and make, pages for lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And what you write down in the notebook is the different types of identification that you catch yourself with, so you know which lesson to go back to that is going to be the most useful for you. And you do the same with the second fetter. Everything in every lesson you write in individual pages, so you know exactly where to go back to about the things we're going to talk about in this fetter. Because what I'm going to touch about is you need to be in a place where you no longer identify with thought. You might still identify with feelings and emotion because it's a huge one and it won't all fall until we are in the 8th. So lots of time to look into that. But you need to be in a space where you can pull yourself up and observe the feelings when they happen. So if you feel like anger coming up in you, you no longer react, but you observe what is happening. What underlying belief is it that I am defending right now? Is this about healthy boundaries, or am I just a whiny toddler? You might also be in a position where you do react. You do yell, and you do slam the door, and you do all of that. But then afterwards, instead of holding all that against you, you're in a position where you can observe what actually happened. And that is super important, that you are there before you move on to this fetter. Because in this fetter, I'm going to dissolve, or you are going to dissolve, all the diversions and all the distractions that you do, which means that it's going to be a very, very raw experience. It's going to be there will be nowhere for you to run and nowhere for you to hide, because I'm pulling the rug under every single diversion and distraction that you have. And you're going to it's going to feel like you're very, very naked and very, very exposed. And that's why it's very important also that you have a group or you have a guide, someone that can help you and support you when you are in this period of your life. And if you have previous mental health issues, or if you have like issues that you have had anxiety or depression, or you have had uncontrolled rage, or you have had anything like that, and you have a therapist, or you thought about having a therapist at some point in your life, now is the time to get one. Now is the time to contact your therapist and going like, I just want you on hold, in case I need it. Because it is a huge one. There will no longer be anything you can do without you observing why you do this. There would be a lot of introspection. There would be a lot of referring back to fear, anger, guilt, and shame, or referring back to the toxic starting point. No matter what happens, I want you to stay in that open space where there's no judgment, there's no assumption, there's no prejudice, there's just the pure experience, and you just observe. And at any point, you can close your eyes and breathe deeply and go into your direct experience. That's where you breathe, and whatever feeling or emotion or thought is happening in your mind, you allow it to become big. You really, really allow it to be big. And then when you feel ready, you separate the feeling and the direct experience, the sensory experience of the body right now. And then you can see that the feeling is only happening and only giving you a mood because of a thought. We're back in the first. So because of that thought, you have a feeling or you have an emotion that is coming up. What happens when you separate the two and you just stay in your direct experience and you just stay in the body? Is there anything in that? Is there any connection between the sensory experience that you have right now and a feeling? Are those two connected at all? And you will see that no, they're not. No, they're not. The thought and the feeling are connected. But the sensory experience, the knot in the stomach, when you remove the word knot and you remove the word stomach and you just sit with the sensory experience and there's no label attached to it, then that is just what is happening right now. There's no hooks into the past or hooks into the future. That can only happen with a thought. So you just stay with the sensory experience right now, and then you have awareness and pay attention to what is alive right now. And in that space, nothing needs to change and nothing needs to happen. There are no preferences towards anything. There's nothing that could be better than right now. There's no expectation for anything to either, be improved or be removed. Everything just is as it is. And in that space, everything is completely okay. It's completely okay. You can always go into that space, and I can warmly recommend you to practice that. Do the just sitting, and I have in the 6th lesson, I think, I was talking about how you do that with just sitting. Oh, it wasn't the QA, I can't remember, but it's in the material about doubt, how you do the just sitting, where you just focus on that and go into a direct experience. And at any point during this Fetter, when it feels like the rug is pulled, just remember there's no rug. There's no fear, there's no anger. All that is just repeated thoughts put on a physical sensation. And when you start to separate it, you can feel in your body that the sensory experience that you have doesn't call out for any reaction whatsoever. It's just there. It's just there. There's nothing more. Like when you hear a bird, it doesn't call out for any reaction. It's just a sound. When you smell something, it's just a smell. Taste is just a taste. It doesn't call out for any reaction on its own. And that is what you practice. I also want to say that for this Fetter to work for you, you need to have a practical application of the first 2 fetters. And that's why your notebook is very important and your groups are very important. You need to have a practical application of it. It doesn't work if you think that this is an intellectual exploration. A lot of people go to seminars and lectures and workshops and they participate as if it was, in the movie theater, watching the X-Men. Ah, great. And leave the movie theater, and that was it. So a lot of people, they, participate on different things, retreats and all that, where that is how it's viewed. There's no practical application of it. And obviously that doesn't work. The only way this works is for you to take the information and implement it into a practical application. It's why you can be meditating morning, noon, and night and still go out in the world and be a proper twat. Of course you can. If you don't implement the experience into a practical application in your everyday life, it doesn't have any merit. It doesn't have any merit. You have probably by now read every single book there is to read, watched every single YouTube video there is to watch. You know? You need to implement it, no matter if it's this video or anything else, any book you read, you need to implement it into a practical application. And if you don't do that, it's not going anywhere. It's just, the X-Men. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So it's important for you, before you can work with this fetter, and I also think that is one of the reasons why this fetter is is avoided by so many people, because this fetter is the one that calls on you using it, really, really looking at every single thing you do, everything you plan. Look at that delusion that you think you can plan into the future. Into what future? There is only now. What exactly do you expect is going to happen? Any expectation that you have, how is that even possible? It's just complete, mind made. It's not real at all. It's just a thought about something. You could be thinking about the color blue. There's nothing in it. And this is the fetter that is completely, unraveling all of that. There's nowhere to go. There's no diversion or distraction taking place anymore. And I hope that if you're in a group and you hear somebody using diversions or distractions, call them out. When you hear yourself using diversions or distractions, call yourself out. Because it's the only way that we can pull ourselves out of the habit that we have, where we put ourselves into a position of being a victim, let's say, or we put ourselves into a position of being, in circumstances. That's a victim too. So, or in the right, feeling that I have the right to react. That is a diversion. That's a diversion. What we're going to talk about in this fetter is, first of all, the lesson today that is about diversions and distractions. We're going to talk about the second lesson, which is going to be about self-care for non-self. It's all the things, all the self-care areas that need to be in place for you to be in a position in life when non-self can happen. And the last thing is about what I call presence and flow. The third fetter is connected with the ninth. They're pairs. And the ninth fetter is about being in that synchronicity where flow is just happening. That can only happen if you have worked with a third fetter. Because if you have any kind of attachment to habits or routines or rituals or thoughts about doing, procrastination, any kind of escape, if you have any identification of that, ninth fetter is not gonna dissolve itself. You can't work with the ninth if the third has not been looked at and worked with. So in the last lesson, in this fetter, we're going to talk about that presence in flow. We're going to talk about the difference between wants and needs, and we're going to talk about the body yes, body no. So as I said, the third fetter is the last part of the foundational identification. The first one was about identification with thought. Second one was about identification with feeling and emotions. And the third fetter is about all the diversions and distractions that we do not to get in contact with thought and with feeling, to avoid feeling those feelings and get in contact with those emotions. To avoid that, we do a lot of things. But the third fetter is also an identification on its own. It's who you believe you are that is expressed through your actions. So what you do or what you don't do is part of an identification on its own. If you are, like I said, one that have coffee in the morning or do not have coffee in the morning, if you're one that buy organic or do not buy organic, if you're one that buy fair trade or do not buy fair trade, if you go for a run to lose weight or you go for a run for the enjoyment, or if you meditate to become enlightened, if you eat certain things to lose weight or gain weight, if you avoid different people at different times of the day, if you every afternoon at 4 completely crash and shout at all the kids, all those things that you do in your everyday life are part of that diversion. It's part of that identification that you have with who you believe you are. And that is another part of why the third fetter is so important to look at as an identification module. Because if you just, pause the video right now and just reflect a bit. If you look around yourself, everything around you, it's things that you have bought, right? You have bought all of these things with a specific purpose. Either it was a diversion in the moment, you felt like shit, so that's why you went out and, did some retail therapy. You shopped your way through it. Or it was on sale and that's why you bought it, didn't really need it. Maybe you have things that you have inherited from people and it's really, really ugly, you utterly hate it, but you feel guilty about not having it in your home because it was my nan and she loved me so, no, she's dead, but she loved me so much and that's why I keep it on display, utterly hate it. Whatever you surround yourself with is part of that identification. You cannot point at a single thing around you that is not displaying the identification that you have with you, with who you are. That's why it's so exposing to invite people into your home, because everything you surround yourself with is a reflection of your identification, of who you identify with. And if you say, well, I don't identify with any of this, not at all, not a single thing, there's no identification at all. Okay, I would like for you to go out into your closet, pick, one pair of trousers, one shirt, what you need, for a week, and donate the rest. Or go to the kitchen and everything that is on the second and the third row in the cupboard, you just donate right away. Or books that you haven't read, or books that you have read, books that is not really, doing you any favor, self-help books that you read that just made you feel like crap, donate them. You can take everything, in the pile, the pile, the one I'm talking about, the pile that just seems to happen, usually in a kitchen drawer or on the pile on a desk somewhere. That pile, you haven't looked at it for ages. Just empty it. You can take the drawer in your house that is the least looked in drawer. There might be a drawer that you haven't even been in for years. You can take the entire content of that drawer and just toss it in the bin. Put it into a black sack, tie a knot on it, don't even look at it, and just toss it. You will never ever miss it. You feel that contraction that you have in your body right now? You feel that, but I can't do that. That's completely ridiculous. I need stuff in the second line of. I haven't used it this year, the last year, the year before. I haven't used it since the pandemic. But I'm going to keep it. You can't ask me to do that. That's my nan's bowl. You can't ask me to do that. It's completely ridiculous. This, great, amazing. Observe. This is the fetter that has its own type of identification, and you're not even aware. The type of identification that is in the third fetter is also a diversion on its own, about its own. Everything you surround yourself with is part of that maintaining of that identification that you're trying to see through. That's why it's super important to talk about. Super, super important to talk about. You cannot see through self unless you have really looked at everything that self-identify with. You have people whose homes have burned down, and decades later, they are still in bits about all the things they lost in the fire. We're talking about things, If you got all the humans and all the pets and all of that out of the house, you're fine. But the identification with all the things we surround ourselves with is part of that identification. And as long as you identify that much with that much, you can never ever see through self. The only thing that might stand between you and an awakening might be clearing out the attic or the basement or cupboards, And it's not that I'm telling you to do any of that. I just want you to reflect on it. You can just sit down, pause the video again, and just sit down and reflect on how it would feel if you go to the attic and everything, without any exception, all of it is emptied out, given to donation, out on the lawn, all of it is given to donation. People can just come and pick up. You're not charging anything. You're just giving it all away. Away, away, away. This is about your awakening. It's not about the price tag of things. And if you now are sitting right now in the comment section and writing about all the money you're giving away, well, identification again. Look into that. Look into that. It's only about you becoming aware of the different levels of identification that is taking place. And this fetter is the one with all the diversions. So far, we're only a few minutes in. So far, you have been justifying a lot of identification, a lot of things that in your mind might not have done it out loud, but in your mind, you have been justifying your diet, your exercise routine, the things you surround yourself with, your attic. You have been identifying and defending a lot of that. Amazing. Super, super interesting. There you go. There you go. Write it down. Write all of it down. Because all of it is part of your awakening process. All of it, all those things that you don't want to let go of because it's a stick in a wheel. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. So in this lesson, there are 5 things that I would like to talk to you about. The first thing is about the identification with thought. As we talked about in the first fetter, thoughts are just another sensory experience. So it has a completely random pattern. And there's no difference between a thought, a sound, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, or touching. There's no difference. It's just a sensory experience. So the thought that is happening, it's just a thought. There's no identification with it. It's just a thought. It's just a smell. It's just a sound. It's just a sight. It's just a touch. Nothing else. As soon as we identify with a thought, as we talked about, all thoughts is about something. And as soon as you pick up a thought, there is a belief in that thought to be more important or more real or more true than sense of smell, see, hear, touch. That identification with thought is important to look at, because the identification is the one that makes you believe that something can be added or subtracted to the moment. So when you have a thought and there's an identification with that thought, there's selfing happening. That's ego. That ego always believes that I am not, I should be, which means that the moment can always be improved in some way. The next moment can be better than this moment. And that is the lie. That is absolutely impossible. And that is the identification that we believe in. And that identification needs to be looked at, just observed, not believed in or removed in any way, just observed. And the thing is that you don't need to change anything. You just observe it. Because when you observe it, it falls apart. You don't need to work on removing your ego. That's just a concept. You can't. But what you can do is just observe it. And by doing that, the ego and the selfing falls apart. And that is what we're doing with the direct experience. We are creating an awareness in what actually is, and by that the selfing falls apart, the ego falls apart. There's nothing believing itself to exist anymore when you are in the direct experience. If in any way you have any kind of hooks in selfing, or any kind of hooks into that type of identification, then go back to the material in the first fetter. And don't see it as you going back and now you're back and working with the first fetter. Don't look at it like that. This is just another tweak on the kaleidoscope. It's not a linear process. The first fetter is not the first. It's just about identification with thought. And whenever you catch yourself in having identification with thought, obviously it's a great idea to look into that identification with thought. That we call it the first fetter is just to have some kind of, linear process when we talk about it. But in itself, it's not the first fetter, It's just about identification with thought. And you might catch yourself in identification with thought even when you're working with the sixth fetter. You all of a sudden realize that, oh my goodness, I actually believe that there is an I here and there's something there. That's identification with thought. I need to go back to look at identification with thought. And that's what you go back to. What you do then is what I said, that you have a notebook and you write all the insights that you have about every lesson. And then you can look back into which of the lessons that you need to dive into more and look into more. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that identification is always delusional. Feelings and emotions are not truth. Feelings and emotion is usually a sensory experience that is happening, a thought attached to that sensory experience that is then creating a feeling. When that thought to that sensory experience is repeated over and over and over, then it becomes an emotion. So when you have a contraction, something is happening. You have a contraction in your body. You have a thought going like, oh, this is panic. This is an anxiety. This is an anxiety. Every time you get that contraction, that thought will attach itself to that sensation and will tell you this is an anxiety. You then repeat that over and over and over and over, and after years, your body will start to release hormones. That the moment you have the feeling, then you are releasing hormones right away, and that is creating the pattern where you biochemically believe that sensation to be about an anxiety. And that is when it's very useful for you to look into the material where I talk about the toxic starting point and where I talk about the emotional indicators, because it's usually something like that is the underlying belief that needs to be looked at. What is also happening when we have that contraction happening, it is to really observe what is really happening. And that is what we do with the direct experience, where you observe that contraction that is happening and you remove all thoughts about it and you just experience that contraction happening. What is that? Is there any connection between this contraction and an anxiety or fear or panic or anything like that? Or is this just a contraction? Is this just a contraction happening? Can you be in a body where contraction is happening? Can you be in a body where you even remove the word contraction and just sit and experience what is happening? Not have any attachment to anything about what is happening, but you're just with what is happening. Another thing that we usually do is about the feelings is that when a feeling happens, we tend to not want that feeling. We tend to want something else, which means that we believe that the moment can be changed. What I am experiencing right now can either be improved or something, can go away. Something that I don't want can be removed, or something can be improved. That is how that is what happens when we believe in a feeling, or we believe in an emotion, and we identify with that. We believe that the moment can be any different than it is. And obviously that's completely delusional. It can't. The moment is exactly like it is. And whatever you believe can be improved or removed, it's just a thought. Nothing can happen to this moment. The moment is as it is. And Eckhart Tolle has done this beautifully. His material is amazing if you want to really, really explore what this moment actually is. So everything you add or subtract to this moment is part of that delusion. And if you need to look into this, then go back to the second fetter, because normally when we really, really believe in a feeling or an emotion, normally it's about fear, anger, guilt, and shame. There's an underlying belief that the world is in a certain way, or I am in a certain way, or men are in a certain way, or mothers are, or Jews, or Muslims, or blacks, or gay, or trans, or, are in a certain way. Tomatoes, dogs, summers, winters. We have that underlying belief of things or people being in a certain way. That underlying belief has nothing to do with any of that. That is exactly like it's supposed to be, exactly like it's supposed to be. I once heard somebody saying that strawberries should be sweeter. Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? Don't you think that strawberries are exactly like strawberries are supposed to be, and you think something should be different than it is? What does that have to do with strawberries? Absolutely nothing. So really, really becoming aware of all the things you believe is in a certain way that is usually attached to you having an underlying belief about fear, anger, guilt, and shame. And that needs attention. The reason why it's so important to go back to the second fetter and work with that, it's that there are areas in you that need unconditional acceptance, compassion, and love. Whenever you have an underlying belief about fear, anger, guilt, and shame, it's because there's some part of you that still has not been met. There's some part of you that needs to be met, that needs to be healed and needs to be soothed, and you need to go back and work with that. So it's not that there's any truth in whatever you believe is in a certain way. If you have an underlying belief of fear, anger, guilt, and shame, there's no truth in that. There is no fear, anger, guilt, and shame. There's just a part of you that has a wound that needs healing. And you can only heal trauma by being with it. Like I said, when we talked about it, there is no trauma. There's only a belief about trauma. But that is enough. And that belief needs to be met. It needs to be met with unconditional acceptance, compassion, and love. So if you have anything in your life that is an indication of there still being fear, anger, guilt, and shame as an underlying belief for anything, go back to the material in the second fetter, work with your notebook, where you write down in every single lesson the different insights that you have had, work with your guide, talk about it in the groups, keep bringing it up until you are healed. But make sure that you do not intellectualize it, There's nothing to think about. There's something to create space for, and that can be done in silence, So you don't need to, a diversion that I often see when we talk about fear, anger, guilt, and shame is that you're trying to talk it to death. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. You're just emphasizing. It's not going to happen. What you need is to create space for what actually is. You need to create space full of unconditional acceptance, love, and compassion to what is, what needs to be met, and then it will dissolve all by itself. That is also the part that really, really needs your attention and really needs you to put it into a practical application. You can't just think about fear, anger, guilt, and shame. You need to feel it, pull yourself out of it, go into the direct experience and create space to whatever keeps coming up, because it keeps coming up for a reason. There's something that needs your attention. So the second fetter really, really needs your attention. And I know that the material for the second fetter, it's big. I mean, the lessons are like 2 hours each. So it's a lot. And I know it's a lot. But, you're not in a rush. Why the hurry? Go back to it over and over and over until you are You have created space for everything. The third thing is about your starting point. It's very important for you to become aware of that conditioning that you have, of the distress or the trauma that you have, because that is the starting point for everything. If you have an underlying belief about fear, anger, guilt, and shame, that is your starting point. And it can either become toxic, where you are diverting your attention from what actually needs your attention. You're diverting that and either, shaming, blaming, complaining about other people or about other things, which is also just part of the diversion. And that needs your attention. So the starting point, you need to become aware of what your starting point is. Of when you, for example, go out and buy stuff, you need to know why you're doing that. What are you reacting? When you open the fridge, you need to become aware of why do you do that. And what you eat, you need to become aware of why. When you exercise, you need to become aware of why. Because the starting point is shaping everything in your life. And that needs a lot of awareness. It's also because if you have any kind of repressed trauma, that is shaping your personality. And when we move into the third fetter, what we're working with here, that repressed personality will surface. And trauma is not dangerous at all to look at. Trauma does not need to be solved. Trauma needs space. And trauma needs compassion and love and a lot of acceptance. It just needs to be there. It needs to be, like I talked about, we're going into the room, see the house, that's the non-self. You go into every single room, you turn on the light, and you look at everything in the room. So there's no part of you that you no longer have an issue with is there. No matter what people say about you, you're completely fine because you've been in the room. People are allowed to say whatever they want about you because you know that it's true. You are everything. How can you limit yourself? How can you believe that you can only be one thing? So you don't go like, no, I'm not cheap. I'm not cheap. I'm very, very generous. I'm very generous. I often donate things. I'm not cheap at all. You need to be in a space where when people call you cheap, you can go like, yeah, I am super cheap. Want to hear about it? Because you know that you can only be generous if you can also be cheap. You are both at the same time. You are everything at the same time. When you believe that you're only one thing, I'm always kind towards everyone. Oh my goodness, sweetheart, there's something you need to look at. There's something you need to look at. You need to also embrace you being an utter twat. Because you're everything at the same time. If there are parts of you that you do not want to be, then you need to look at it. Because there's an identification with that. If you need to explore your twatty personality sides, then do that. Go out and see what that, how that influences you. Taking the biggest piece of the pie or something like that. See how that works out for you. It's just to look into it, to feel into that identification that you have, because you need to embrace everything. You are everything. You cannot only be love. If you believe that you're only love, you need to look into hate and resentment. You need to embrace the part of you that is full of hate and resentment, because you're everything at the same time. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out in life and be a twat. You can just be a twat in your thoughts. That's enough. And a lot of times when we're just, hateful or resentful towards people in our thoughts, it gives you a great indication of the identification that you have. So the starting point is very important to become aware of, for you to embrace everything, because you are everything. You're not only one thing. If you are, you need the other leg to stand on. It's yin yang. You need both legs to be in balance. And it's not that you should only be kind or only be hateful. There's a middle way. And that middle way can only be found if you have entered the room, turn on the light, and you accept and acknowledge all of it. You are all of it. Another part of the starting point is also, and I said that before, you can't always be happy. Sometimes you're not happy. You can't always be compassionate or always be loving. You can, however, always be kind, because kind is like the foundational go-to starting point that you can decide for yourself to have. You can decide to always be kind. That the starting point for your thoughts, let's say, they spring from a place of kindness, where you are exploring the parts of you that you do not accept and that you do not want, from a space of kindness. And that means that you do this for you to achieve your freedom and become richer, to explore who you are as a person and attain your freedom. And that can be done from a kind place. So look into your thoughts. Is it possible for you to be kind towards yourself? Because for a lot of people, they can't. A lot of people can't be kind to themselves. If you listen to your thoughts, you might be talking to yourself in a way that's very, very abusive. You would never ever speak to other people like that. You would never ever do like that as you do with yourself. You never laugh at them as you do of yourself. So look into that. Look into why there are certain rules that apply to you and other rules that apply to other people. Is it possible for you to be kind in your thoughts towards yourself and towards others? Is it possible for you to create that space for errors to happen where it's completely fine? I mean, we're human beings, If you can't create a space where it's okay for people to be who they are, you have a foundation in shame. You live by rules that are so restricted that there's no space for you at all, and you are full of shame. So see if you can expand yourself into a starting point of kindness, where no matter what happens, it's okay. It's okay. If you succeed or don't succeed, it's okay. And the reason why I choose kindness, I can always hear, I can, almost hear the comment section going about me choosing kindness to be the thing to have as a starting point. The reason is that if your starting point is about kindness, if you choose that your starting point is about kindness, no matter what happens, you have an open space where that's okay. You could also say that it could be compassion. It's just compassion is a bit more loaded than kindness, at least in my opinion. That's probably my identification. You look into yours. And I just want to, make a little intermezzo, a little bracket here, and saying that I don't know if you're familiar with the Heart Sutra, the Prajna Paramita in Buddhism. There's a sentence there that I absolutely love. I love the entire sutra, but there's a sentence there. And it's where you get to that point of your awakening where you are freed of all delusive hindrances and you're rid of the fear bred by it. If you really think about that sentence, being freed from all delusive hindrances, what delusive hindrances do you have in your life? What delusive hindrance do you have? And then being rid of the fear bred by it. So you have a delusive hindrance. There's something in your life that's completely delusion, but it is a hindrance. It is a stick in the wheel. That is there because of fear. You're fearful of what will happen when you start to rock that boat. And that's the third fetter. For me, that sentence or that, part of the sutra has always been about the third fetter. Freed of delusive hindrances and rid by the fear bred by it. Yeah. The fourth one I would like to talk about is the bubble of reality. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of that lesson about the bubble of reality. Everything you see in the world is just things you think you see. Everything you hear is only things you think you hear. everything that happens is only what you think is happening. None of what you think is happening or seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting is what you actually are seeing, hearing, smelling or tasting. That is a thought attached to it. And that thought is part of your identification. That is coming from somewhere. Nothing happens on its own. Every single thought you have is a part of a pattern. It's part of and it's part of the identification pattern. The thoughts themselves don't really have a pattern. They're just completely random. But the ones that you pick up are part of an identification pattern. And that is important to look at. And when you really understand what the bubble of reality, what it really means, you also see that no one can ever say or do anything wrong. You're the only one judging it as wrong. And even if 10 people stand next to you and agree with you, that just means they have, similar values. It only means that you agree on that. It doesn't mean that the action is wrong. Who are we to know what leads to other people's freedom? So becoming aware of that bubble of reality is really, really important. No one can trigger you. I hear that so often. I got really, really triggered by. Are you sure about that? Let's look into that. Let's look into that. Are you sure that Janice really, really triggered you? Are you sure about that? Are you sure that this video really, really triggers you? Are you sure? Or could it be that you hear something that you assume you hear, and then you have an opinion about that assumption, not by what is said, not by what is done, but your opinion is based on that assumption. It's only the post-it, and that post-it is yours. No one can trigger you. No one can trigger you. Other people can be in the world exactly like they are, and that's fine. None of your business. None of your business. No one can trigger you. You trigger you, and you have a topic you need to look at. You have an identification that so far you have been avoiding to look at. So every time you hear somebody saying that they really, really got triggered by something, just know that in that moment, they're pretending that it's not about them. They're pretending that it's something or someone on the outside that did something to them, victim, did something to them that they did not like. And they want that to change so they can go back to being in a space where they like to be. That is identification at its, most basic form. It's like back to the first Fetter. There is identification with thought. Nobody can trigger you. Nothing can trigger you. You can get reminders that there's something that you need to look at. And that's why I never use the word trigger. I always call it activate. So if someone is activating you, then you look into the identification that you just activated in you. They didn't do anything. They're just a tool for you to be reminded that there's still stuff to be done. There's still things you need to look at. There's an underlying belief that you're diverting from right now, of fear, anger, guilt, and shame that you do not want. And you're diverting from that by pointing fingers and saying it has something to do with them. It doesn't. It doesn't. You could sit on a desert island and activate exactly that same thing by a thought. And it will still be something that you need to look at because it's yours. It has nothing to do with them at all. So write down all the things that you find really, really triggering. Write it down. Go back to the source. Find out, what is this about? What identification is this about? What are you attaching to this that is not attached? What did you just assume that this was about, that is not about. So it's really, really important to become aware that there's no one that can do anything to you. You're doing it all by yourself. You're the only one identifying. You're the only one activating thoughts, activating assumptions, and merging that with past experiences and creating a story about that based on your past experiences. Remember, the past doesn't exist. That whatever you deem as being the past, it's just thoughts that were repeated that many times that you believe that to be the past. The past does not exist. If I ask you what you did yesterday, just yesterday, you will mention certain things that you will remember. Do you see how many things you do not remember? Do you see how many things are left out because you simply don't remember them anymore? Because you don't remember them, they're gone. They're completely gone. What you do remember is only recalled by thought. And if you repeat those thoughts, that will be your assumption of what yesterday was, how yesterday made you feel. Yesterday didn't do anything. It was just a present moment happening. You having a thought that was activating something from before yesterday or from your childhood or from a different time. You know? Whatever you assume was the past isn't, because you don't remember. Your mind is choosing specific things to remember, and that is creating a memory of yesterday. It's also how it works when we have trauma in our, and why we can be adults. We have had this feeling of shame. You've got no idea why we have a feeling of shame, because I had a great childhood, no idea what, and you can't recall why. Then you might, might be a warm summer day in August, and there's coming a warm breeze, and that breeze smells of coffee, and the connection of the breeze and the warm summer day and the smell of coffee, those three individual things but put together, activates a memory. And then that's how it works. There's no connection or collection of anything. They're just random sensory experiences that, when put together, then becomes a memory. So what you believe happened yesterday didn't. It didn't. It was just your assumption and your judgment of what happened yesterday. And all that becomes part of your bubble of reality. All that becomes part of who you identify as. This also is part of the seventh fetter. When we talk about the seventh fetter, it's when we have nothing that we create into something. So it's identification, but on a much more subtle level. And the things that I just talked about is something that we're going to, return to when we get to the seventh fetter. The last thing I would like to mention when we talk about this part about the bubble of reality is that, do you see now, I mentioned it in the first fetter, I mentioned it in the second fetter, I just want to mention it again. Do you see that they are always right? Have you realized that? If there's still things where you do not believe that they are right, pause the video again and look into that. Everything that you can justify for them not to be right, write it down. Write it down. It's part of your bubble of reality. And then go back to the material about the bubble of reality and look into exactly this. Do you see that they are always right? Do you see that you no longer can argue with your spouse? Ever. You can no longer argue with the neighbor about the garbage bins or the hedge or whatever. You can never argue with Janice in the office or your boss or anyone else. Do you see that? Because when you pick up that gauntlet, you identify. And they are always right. I'm not saying that they hold the ultimate truth, because there is no ultimate truth. But you believe that there is when you defend your truth in the face of other people. Other people are just as right as you are. They are right and you are right, and none of you are. Do you see that? And the fifth and last one is rigid routines are maintaining identification. This is a very important one. Any action that is done with a purpose, any preference that seemingly is more desirable, and any attachment to planning ahead of time, they're just diversions and distractions, nothing else. They're diverting and distracting your attention from the direct experience that you have, and they're used to ease that uncomfortable insight that is right around the corner. So you have an experience that is uncomfortable to be with. Instead of just being with that uncomfortable experience that you have, you use one of the three. Either you have a preference about something that should be different, something else than what is right now would be nicer to have. So this uncomfortable experience that I have, if I don't have this uncomfortable experience anymore, everything would be nicer. If I am in this situation that I don't like, not being in this situation, and everything would be much better. That is a delusion. Nothing in this moment can be any different than it is. This moment is as it is. And if you believe that whatever you're experiencing right now is not okay, then you're deluding yourself. Everything in this moment is exactly like it's supposed to be. And there's nothing away from this moment that is any better than what this moment is. Who are you to know that what you're experiencing in right this minute might not be what you need to lead you to freedom? Who are you to know? You're not God. Who are you to know? Which means that whatever is happening right this moment is perfect and it's just as it should be. It might be exactly what you need to lead you to freedom. So having a preference for anything else than what is right now, having any other feeling than contentment with what is right now, it's just a diversion. The same goes when you are planning ahead of time. When you are in a situation right now and you're removing yourself from this moment and you are going into the future and you are planning for something to happen in a certain way, with that you have tied in expectations. Obviously, I'm not saying that you shouldn't leave home, at 7 if you need to be somewhere at 8. You have work, so you need to leave home at 7 to be there at 8. That type of planning obviously needs to take place. But if you expect to be at work at 8, that is where the delusion come in. Obviously, if you have work and you need to be up at a certain time to be at a certain place at some time, then you need to get up. You need to put in the right circumstances for things to happen. But to expect that things will happen, that is a delusion. And we talk more about this in the next lesson. Right now, I just want you to become aware that there is a diversion happening when you're in the moment and you plan. Look into how much of that diversion that you're doing in the planning, how much of that is connected with fear. Because very, very often when we plan, it's because we have a foundation in fear. There are things that we don't want to happen. There are things that we are afraid of is going to happen. Or we have that foundational fear of life just being life, that we can die. We don't want to look at that. So therefore we plan everything down to minuscule details. And really, really, it's very, very important that everything is happening exactly like we planned it. Nothing can rock the boat because the boat is just a boat full of fear. And we don't want that to happen. So when you start to plan into the future, look into how much of that is attached to a an underlying belief about fear that needs your attention. The parts of you that are fearful, that needs your unconditional acceptance, compassion, and love. How you plan is something we're talking about in the next lesson. Any action that is done with a purpose is a diversion. I just want you to sit with that for a moment. Everything you do, and you do it for something, that is a diversion. And we're talking about more about it in the next lesson. But anything you eat that you eat for a purpose is a diversion. Everything, the way you exercise, if you exercise with a purpose, it's a diversion. If you buy things for a purpose, it's a diversion. If you do anything that has, and you do it for a purpose, that is a diversion. Because you are in the moment and you do something for something else to happen, that is a diversion. And it's a diversion from the moment. In the moment, there's something that you do not want. Let's say that you research which toothpaste to buy, and you want a toothpaste that is best for the oral hygiene, and that is whitening your teeth, and that is why you choose to buy exactly that toothpaste. So you buy the toothpaste with a purpose of doing different things. That is a diversion from your direct experience right now. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't brush your teeth. I'm very, very pro teeth brushing. And I'm very, very pro researching for you to get the proper toothpaste. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that anything you do because of something, there's a diversion in that, and it's just to become aware of that. What is wrong with your teeth as they are? What is that underlying belief that it's not okay as it is? And again, I'm not talking about you not buying a toothpaste. We talk about that in the next lesson. It's not about that. I just want you to now, this week, become aware of all the actions you do that has a purpose. Because even if we start to talk about toothpaste now, what actions that has a purpose are you diverting from and not talking about? So you might go to the comment section to defend your selection of toothpaste. So we don't talk about you being completely anal regarding your exercise regime, So look into that. Then the action of going to the comment section and defending your toothpaste is the diversion. You do that with a purpose. It's a big one. When you really, really sit and look at it, it's a huge one. Because there are so many things in our lives that we do with the purpose of a diversion, for us not to get in contact with that underlying feeling of fear, anger, guilt, and shame. And that's why I find it so important to work with the third fetter of rites and rituals. It's so important because that level of identification that is happening is maintained if we're not looking at it. You're just maintaining your identification if we don't unravel all of it. If you don't look at why you do different things, what purpose do you have with doing this? What underlying belief is motivating you to do this? You need to look at that. Why are you surrounding yourselves with the things that you are? Why exactly that? Why exactly that? And in that, there's a lot of identification that is happening. And I'm not saying that your selection of cups is not a good selection of cups. Not at all. I'm just inviting you to look at the identification that you have with particularly those cups compared to other cups. Because in that, there is a maintaining of a specific identification. And that just needs love and compassion, It's all it needs, So I'm just circling back to this one that I showed you in the last fetter. You see that the survival mechanism is fight, flight, or freeze. The internal energy is action, escape, or pause. And the third Fetter method of diversion is either the aggressive bully that is doing with a purpose. It's either the passive aggressive bully that is procrastinating and escaping away from what actually needs attention, or it's the rigid rituals that is completely putting your life on a pause because things need to be in a certain way, in a certain sequence for it to be right. That the exercise needs to be done at this time every morning. We need to eat this at this time every day. Those very, very rigid rituals that we have and routines that we have, it's just a diversion. Something else is gonna come, like, arriving in you that you do not want to look at if you're not sticking with the plan, having those, and that is part of a survival mechanism that is based in freeze. You are on pause. You are holding your breath. And I'm bringing this up because I want your attention to that. All that, it's just a thought. There is no procrastination. There's no doing or action. There's no pausing. There's no problem. There's only thoughts and ego having a field day. Really, really, rock amok in whatever, delusion that we're having. That's all. That's all. But the third fetter is maintaining that. The rites and the rituals and the routines that you have is maintaining that ego going rock amok, because underneath all that, there's just a thought. And like any other thought, if you remove the post-it to the thought, it's just there. What happens to a thought when you don't think it? So when you remove the post-it, you are left with a sensory experience that is just that, and it usually is a very, very icky sensory experience. It's usually very, very, very uncomfortable. That's why we spend a full life diverting from it. So really have a lot of compassion to whatever is coming up. Really have so much kindness and love towards yourself for whatever is coming up. What you're doing is huge. And it's just asking yourself, can you stay with that? Can you stay with that icky sensation of fear, anger, guilt, and shame? Can you just stay with that? Just breathe into that. Can you create space for that to be there? So you no longer divert. You don't no longer do yourself out of it. That's the fight. Do. You no longer, flight with an escape of procrastination of, doing other things all the time. So you never ever get to where you want to go. That's you that has make over lists. Nothing ever happens and your keys are lying in the freezer, where it's like one thing is just taking over the next. It's complete that ADHD thing that is like that a lot of us recognize, and it is an escape. Can you just, pause that and just stay with that icky sensation of fear, anger, guilt, and shame, that feeling of fear, anger, guilt, and shame? Can you just stay with that and just create space for that? Or when you have like those rituals that is all about putting everything, in a complete freeze state, where nothing is moving back and forth, where it's just panic. It's just a thought. It's not real. It's just a thought. Can you stay with that icky sensation of fear? Breathe with it. Just create space. Whatever harmful routine you use, it's only a diversion. And it's diverting that thought of identification that you have. And that's all. You will hear me say this a lot of times, that whatever you think is the solution for your problem is the problem. And this is very much the theme of this Fetter. So I would like for you to make a list of all the things in your life that you see as a problem. And just, knock yourself out. All of it. Everything you see in your life that you see as a problem. And then you look at it. Every single thing on that list is a solution to a problem. Every single thing on that list is a diversion from something else. So what you're diverting with, that you then say, this is actually the problem, that makes you pour all your attention into that problem. Let's say you want to lose weight, all your attention into the problem of losing weight. What I'm suggesting is that wanting to lose weight is actually a solution to the original problem. So there's an underlying fear of, let's say, guilt or shame that you do not want to feel. Then you project all that frustration into something that you can manage, that you can sort out. And that is about your weight. Let's talk about your weight. We don't talk about the guilt or the shame. Don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about the weight. I'm going to focus 100% on that so I do not see that. So making that list of all the problems in your life, it's very important. And looking at them as a solution to something. What is it you're diverting from? This is just a diversion. Everything on the list, it's just a diversion. Why do you pour your awareness and your attention into that? What is it you're escaping from? What is the underlying belief that you do not want to look at? That is what needs your attention. So start by writing down all the things that are problems in your lives and start to look at them as a solution for something else. And if there's something that you can't figure out, take it to your group or take it up with your guide. What you very quickly is going to realize is that by having all those things on the list that you see as a problem, it puts you in a position where you believe that you can think yourself out of an issue, and you can't. The ego loves this, The ego is the mind. The thinker is the thought, And the ego would love if you can, think about think about me a bit more. And you can't. You can't think yourself out of anything. There's nothing that can be thought of as a solution for anything. Because very, very often all the things on your list is just diversions. What you need to is feel it. You need to sit with it. You need to look into what you're diverting from. And that underlying belief is there because it needs your attention. You cannot keep diverting from it. You need to look at it, create space for it, and be with it. That is what needs your attention, not the things on the list. So all routines in our lives that we maintain and perform with a purpose of improving our identification, they all originate in the first Fetter, identification with thought, and in the second Fetter, identification with feelings and emotions. Everything you are doing with a purpose is a diversion from those two. Those two are the ones that need your attention and needs your awareness. Most of it is happening subconsciously. You're not even aware of it. The third Fetter is where we distinguish between all this. And it makes identification very difficult because all three Fetters are completely interwoven. All three Fetters are connected, since the thought and the feelings that we don't want is diverted from by the third Fetter. And that's why I said previously, if I could, just telepathically give you all this information, I would, because you need to have all of the information at your disposal right away at the same time. And it's also why it's important to go back and forth between the first three Fetters to really untangle the knot of identification. And it's also why it's so important for you to work with this as a practical application, because you cannot think your way out of this. You You need to live it. You need to work with it in your everyday life. When you're with Janice, when you're with your partner, when you are opening the fridge, when you're going for a walk, when you are cleaning up or not cleaning up. Every single day, you need to work with this as a practical application to really, really discover the identification with thought, the identification with feelings, and the diversions not to feel that. You need to live it. So really, really be curious, to everything you do. Look into it, because you do it with an identification in the action and with the purpose of the action. And it's also why, in order for you to move forward with the fetters, you need to be very, very clear on the identification that is happening. You need to be very clear of that feeling of something needing to be different than it is, because it has the foundation in I am not, I should be mindset. So when you have the feeling of things needs to be different, or you need to do something in a certain way, to become aware of that identification is very important. Otherwise, you can't move forward. So every single daily routine you have is just a manifestation of your mindset and of your ego identification. And that needs to be looked at. And not judged in any way, but just looked at. So really look at it and see, do you recognize how much identification is taking place? In everything you do or don't do. In every single action you have. Do you see how much identification is taking place? Do you see the underlying foundational belief is reflected into every single action you take or don't take? Do you see that? That underlying belief of fear and guilt and shame, do you see how prevalent and actual and factual and present it is all the time? Because you're diverting from it. And it makes it even more there. It makes your subconscious believe it to be true, that fear and guilt and shame is true, and that is why you're diverting all the time. So by diverting, you're just making yourself believe more in it. Whereas what you could do is stop, reflect, look into it in your direct experience. How much of this is actually true? Or how much is it just things that I think is true? And if you remove all identification, every habitual action that you have is completely deflated. With every single daily routine you have a very clear indication of where the identification is. And when you remove that identification, the daily routine completely falls apart. So let's say that you eat with the purpose of losing weight. There's an identification in that. There's an identification in I'm fat, I need to do something about that. I need to take charge and I need to look at my diet, and that is why I'm eating like I'm eating. And in that, there's a lot of identification. So you have a daily routine of being on your case about you being fat. When that identification is removed, when there's no longer an issue with being fat or not being fat, when there's no longer an issue or an opinion about you being fat or not being fat, when that is completely removed, the identification is gone. And by that, the daily routine falls. Again, I'm not condoning and saying, gosh, knock yourself out, cook light and burgers. It's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about more about this in the next lesson. I just want you to become aware of how much of your daily routine and your day is actually a ritual that you have. And that ritual and that routine is tied in with an identification. If the identification is removed, the routine itself falls apart. You might have a routine about going to bed early, or lying and scrolling, or having a glass of wine when you come home from work, or anything like that. If you look into the underlying belief in that, and you look into the identification with the underlying belief, the routine is going to fall apart. You only maintain that routine because of the identification with the underlying belief. And it's also, as long as we identify, we remove ourselves from the present moment. And in the present moment, nothing needs to happen. Nothing needs to be different. Nothing needs to be added or subtracted. But the identification puts us in a position where we believe that things needs to be different. And in that lies a lot of routines. A lot of rituals that we do on a daily basis lie in the expectation of us needing to be different, of us wanting to, and the assumption of us needing to be different. But if you remove that identification and you're only in the present moment, nothing needs to change or happen. So that approach of striving towards an assumed expectation or a hypothetical goal, it completely lacks the spontaneity, and it always leads to disappointment because we are in the identification with a specific outcome. We are no longer in the present moment. There's nothing in the present moment that can be disappointing, ever. It's not possible because nothing needs to happen when you're in the present moment. And that dissatisfaction that the ego always have, is perpetuating itself because the ego is never satisfied. No matter what happens, it always wants more. It always wants something else. It's a +1 game that no matter what number you say, the ego is going to add 1 and always want more or something different. And that can only happen with identification. So everything you do with a purpose, or anything you do for anything to be any different, it's ego-based and is part of the identification. And it's also why I call this the rigid routines, or the unskillful routines, or the harmful routines or rituals that we have. Because it's harmful in itself because the ego wants something else. It wants something else than what is right now. And we do things for other things to happen, for other things to improve, and that is why we do it, and that is harmful. Because we are removing ourselves from our direct experience and the present awareness that we have in this moment. So in order to move further with Fetter work, we need to de-identify. And we need to realize that there's no thought or no feeling or no emotion that is truth. None of that is truth. What is truth is what is happening in your direct experience, in the pure being, where nothing needs to be added or subtracted, where it just is. So reality is what is unfolding itself in the present moment. And what I would like for you to work with in this Fetter is turning your awareness from the identification in the ego and from the belief that anything can be any different and should be any different, and turning that awareness into your direct experience, into that pure being, and moving from that space of the pure being. And this is a tall ask. This is 9 Fetter stuff, but as I said, the 3rd and the 9th are a pair. It's when you are in that pure being that you have a natural flowing of movement, which means that you do not plan for a meal. You move to prepare a meal when you feel the need for a meal. And that also means that you cannot plan what you want to eat, because you don't know what you want to eat until you are in the moment. In that pure being, there is just a movement happening, and eating is happening. There's no preferences with eating before it happens. It's moving towards the fridge and opening the fridge, and by that you see what you feel like. And it might not be what you have planned, but here we go. The ego planned the shopping. It's that natural movement in the being. And the same with exercise. There's no planning of exercise. There's just a natural movement towards exercise happening. And the exercise that is happening is done with a pure presence and a pure being while you're doing the exercise. So you still, if you like to weightlift, will still lift weights. If you like to go for a walk, you will still go for walks. If you do not like to run, you will probably stop running. If you like to jump trampoline, you will start jumping trampoline, because it's that pure moving with whatever need is present. It's not what you want to do, we're talking about that in the third lesson. It's not what you want to do, it's what the need is moving you to. And if you're tired, then you go and lie down. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're thirsty, you drink. If you need the bathroom, you go right away. You don't just finish up the dishes first, you go to the bathroom right away. It's that present awareness that I would like you to go into, where there is no ritual, there is nothing that you're doing with a purpose. Things are happening, and you do them because the body, the meat suit, has a need that is met. And how we do that is what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. For this week, what I would like for you to become aware of is everything I talked about. And I know this is a long lesson. This is a big thing. There's a lot of things that I'm asking you to look into. And I would like for you to take the proper time to really look into this. Don't hurry through it. Listen back to the other lessons that are equally long, and really use your notebook, use your group, use your guide, speak with friends and family, people that you trust and that you can, talk to about this, and really look into the identification that you have with the different things. Look at all the things that you do with a purpose. Every action or inaction that you take, look at the underlying identification with it. Really look into it. Spend time with this and create space for this. And if you have anything you would like to share, then as always, I love to hear it. You feel free to share in the comment section. As you probably know by now, the comment section is an amazing place where there's so many gold nuggets to pick up, because people are sharing their personal experiences, and it's so useful. So whatever you're experiencing, please feel free to share it in the comment section. Go to Vince's meeting. I will put his email in the comment in the description below as well, so you can participate in Vince's Sunday meeting. Make sure you speak with your guide, and really spend this time to become aware of all the identification that you have with the rites and rituals. It's an amazing process, and yeah, you can just look forward. That was it for today. Thank you very much.